Hey guys, welcome back. So today, it's part 3 on this Path Winder Go Kart. If you missed the first 2 parts, I'll leave links to them down in the description and up above. But to catch you up real quick, this kart was given to me condition unknown. In part 1, we spent a bunch of time triaging the 5-horse Briggs that came on this machine just to find out it was full of water and a total loss. In part 2, we got a replacement engine. We also got the torque converter installed and prepped the frame. We got everything painted up. We did some structural repairs on the seat frame. And, well, that brings us to today. We are ready to put this thing back together and take it out for a ride. So, I've got a bunch of parts from GoPowerSports and BMIKarts, also a few things from Amazon. So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. So let's start here in the back with the new axle. Before we can add the ball bearings and the wheels, we need to get the new sprocket and band brake installed right between this engine mount and the outer frame. Gonna leave this stuff floating for now. Until we get the engine mounted and the band brake installed, we can't secure this down. But what I do want to do is get the ball bearings installed. We'll center the axle, lock it in place with a collar, and get the wheels installed. All right, this axle, it is now perfectly centered, and what we need to do now is lock this inner race on the ball bearing to the shaft. And to do that, we actually use this piece right here. On this side, it just looks like a bushing, but on this side, we have a circle that's machined out. But if you look at it real close, that circle, it is not centered. The wall is pretty thick right there, and it's very thin right there. So this acts as a cam. And what you want to do is install it, but if you just slide it on, it's not going to go onto this piece right here because this also is shaped like a cam. So you need to rotate it until it drops into place, which is right there. And then you want to tighten it in the direction of travel. So normally this rotates clockwise, so you just rotate this collar clockwise until it tightens up, which is right there. And at that point, the axle is now locked to the inner race. And it also kind of has the added side effect of holding the axle in place. So, before setting that set screw, there is another hole right there that is empty. The sole purpose of it is to use a punch to just tap this a little bit tighter before locking down on that screw. All right, that should be good enough. So we'll just tighten this set screw. And then I actually do have a collar that the sole purpose of it is to clamp down on the axle to hold things in place. So I'm also going to add that just for good measure so that this axle has no chance of walking around. This lock collar, it's also keyed. You don't have to use a key, but if you do, it just ensures that the collar, if it should loosen up, it's going to rotate with the axle, instead of spinning free. So we will add a key and just clamp down. It's amazing the difference new ball bearings make. That is super smooth and quiet. So, at this point, this ball bearing is done. Axle is locked in place. I did the exact same thing over here. So we are more or less ready to get the wheels installed. But now that I'm looking at it, I think it makes more sense to get this drum brake squared away before putting something in the way. So I'm going to get the pedals reinstalled. We'll connect the linkage that runs to the back. We'll get the band installed. We'll center this up and lock it down. These both have to be bent in the same direction. Otherwise, they're going to hang up on the frame when you try to brake. Yeah, I think that's pretty much perfect right there. So we need to get the key installed. There is a set screw on the other side. And then it's kind of optional, but I do have some extra lock collars, so I'm going to put one on each side just to help hold this in place. I think it's safe to get the back wheels on, so I'm just greasing up the axle. I added the key and another lock collar. So this sets how far the wheel is allowed to install on the shaft. So this grease hopefully will prevent rust. So, the guy that takes this apart in the future hopefully has a fighting chance. As far as the front wheels go, the plan originally was to clean up these rims and reuse them. But what I discovered is that they are fairly egged out and not really worth saving. So I ended up ordering a new set of rims. I also got some new tires, a new tube. So this is more or less ready to assemble, but I am going to reuse the old hub. You know, it's in fairly good condition, but the bearings, they are more or less shot. So I picked up some new bearings. They are chilling in the freezer. So let's get the old ones out. We'll get the new ones in and finish getting this together. This bearing is completely shot. It barely moves and is super crunchy. And there's a bunch of rust going around too, so I'm not so sure this is going to come out easily. So I might apply a bit of heat to this first, and then we'll try pounding it out. There's one. Heh, it just fell out. So we'll start with the tube. We'll get that inside the new tire. Give it a little bit of air to give it some shape, and then we can put the rims on. Going to use this bolt just to locate kind of where the second half needs to go. These need to align in order to get it properly on the hub. All right, the engine, it is secured to the frame. I did align the sprocket. We're pretty much dead on, so I added the key, I set the set screws, and really all we need to do is add the chain. But I'm going to hold off on that for now because I do want to test the engine. I think we are going to have some pilot jet issues, and the crankshaft that's in here is new to this engine. So I want to make sure we don't have any engine issues. I also want to test the torque converter. Now, if you watched last week's video, you might be wondering what happened to the one I installed last week. And I think you know what I'm going to say. But the one I installed last week was a Chinese clone from Amazon. It was about $65. We found an issue right here with the jack shaft where it wasn't long enough to really engage the nylock, locking this nut in place. So my fear was that this was going to spin off and the driven pulley was just going to launch into space. Now, surprisingly, there are about 2,800 reviews on Amazon, and most of them are good. But when you start reading them, even the good reviews, people were having problems with this setup. You know, a lot of people were saying the belt shredded within the first hour. A lot of people had issues with the bushing failing within a few days. And an unnerving amount of people complained that the driven pulley or the driver literally exploded and causing injuries. So, yeah, it's going back to Amazon. So instead, we have the OEM Comet torque converter, which that was a clone of. So I didn't show this installation because it was exactly the same as what you saw last week. Anyway, I feel much better about this because if someone got hurt and it was because of the torque converter, you know, I would feel pretty bad knowing that maybe that could have been prevented if I didn't cheap out. So yeah, this one costs about 3 times more, but I think it's money well spent. Anyway, let's get some gas in the engine. I want to fire this engine up, make sure it's running well, and we'll test out the function of the torque converter. So before we start this, there's just a couple things to note here. To shut the engine down, there's no switch yet. So we just need to ground out this wire somewhere to the engine block, and that should kill spark. The next thing is the throttle control. There is actually a set screw for the max speed. You can just kind of see it right there. So I'm not sure right now what the max speed is set to. This bracket, it's actually brand new, so that screw has never been calibrated. So once the engine's going, I'm going to use a tachometer and just see kind of where we're peaking out. You know, this engine's rated at 3,600 RPM. So, you know, likely I'm going to set it a little bit higher than that because this I'm not going to rely on to set the max speed. It's actually just going to be a backup. Once we get the cable connected to the throttle, I'm going to put a physical stop right here so that the driver can only push the pedal so far. And if for some reason that fails, you know, the backup will be this little set screw right here, which, you know, can be overpowered by something like that. So I don't want to rely on that normally, but I do want to set it just in case. I think we're looking pretty good. It started right up. The engine sounds good, and the torque converter, no issues. It's doing exactly what it should. So yeah, even the engine speed was pretty much dead on at about 3,600 RPM. I did back that screw out a bit just to get a little bit above that. And I also brought the idle speed up just a touch to kind of smooth out the idle. So everything seems to be a go. I guess the only thing worth noting is that there was a vibration at high speed. It was kind of hard to tell if it was coming from the cart or the lift table, or maybe both. So, I don't think we're really going to know for sure until we finish this thing up. So I think we're at that point where we need to get the chain, the seat, and the wheel installed and take this thing for a ride. Actually, I might be jumping the gun a little bit because there are a few things we need to do before getting the wheel, seat, and chain on. Namely, some of the engine controls. We need to reconnect the switch to shut the engine down. And right now, the gas pedal, it's not connected to anything. So let's get those two things squared away, and then we can finish this up. So this is the switch that came on this machine. It actually is a really nice switch. The way that it mounts, is pretty unique. I haven't seen this before. There are two straps that just wrap around one of the pipes to hold this in place. And it actually picks up the ground from these straps. So we're going to have to clean those up, clean a little bit of paint off the frame as well. But when you move the switch to off, it should pass that ground down to the ignition coil. So let's test this real quick because this cart was outside for a pretty long time. So right now we're in the off position, or actually the on position. So if I test from here to here, we should get no connection. And we don't. But if I move the switch to off, we get a connection. So switch actually seems good. So I'm thinking we actually don't need to take paint off the side. It would help, but we have a set screw right there that kind of drives this in and keeps everything tight. So if I just clean off a little patch on the back side, I think we'll get a good enough ground. All right, let's test this real quick. I've got one lead connected to this wire, and the other lead I'm touching to the metal on the rear axle. So right now we have no continuity, which is correct. If I turn it off, we get a connection to ground. So this part is good. So I was going to say, let's run the wire to the back, but I can see this wire has issues. So I'm likely just going to cut it, and we'll run a new wire back. All right, the wire routing, it's complete. You know, I sent it the same way as the original. Didn't really see a better way to do it. So right now it's up here. We just need to add a bullet connector and connect it over to the coil. But before I do that, you know, I think I do need to ground the engine. Right now it's sitting on a painted pedestal that likely isn't making a ground connection. So if I don't connect the block to the frame, then when you flip the switch to off, nothing's going to happen. So let's just double check that real quick. Then we'll add a grounding strap and do the same test. So surprisingly, we actually do have a ground from the engine to the frame. So that's a little surprising, but I guess it kind of makes sense because the top here, it's held in by these nut certs. That definitely has a connection to this bracket. And then these bolts here are serrated, the nuts on the other side. So those likely cut into the metal, which is why we have a connection. You know, that said though, I am going to add a grounding strap from the block right into this engine mount for good measure. These connectors. So this right here is the linkage that connects up front to the gas pedal. We have a return spring, so when someone pushes on the pedal, the spring brings it back to the idle position. You know, originally this was connected just by sandwiching this end of the cable between these two washers, and the sleeve was held on by this clamp right here. So, you know, technically we could do the same thing. The problem though is that this cable, although it's not stuck, I wouldn't say it moves very well. You know, it's also damaged in the middle and is too short. So this cable, it's out. Instead, I ordered a universal go-kart cable, and this one has an eyelet, which actually should make a much better connection to that stud. And as far as, you know, how to secure the sleeve, we could reuse this clamp, but then we lose kind of the fine adjustment we have here. So instead, I'm thinking we just eliminate that, cut a piece of angle, weld it to the frame, and then we can use these two nuts to secure it and make fine adjustments as needed. Yeah, so for now, I'm going to get this old hardware out of the way. You know, I might have something better than a rusty bolt, and maybe one that's a little bit larger. That eyelet It's a pretty large diameter. It looks like we could fit a slightly larger bolt in this spot. So if I did this right, that slot right there should allow this cable to pass through. And then we can just insert it like that, tighten down with the nuts to kind of lock everything in place like that. And then I added one extra hole on the bottom. That's just for a plug weld. We'll add a few tacks going around to hold this in place. So it's been just over an hour. You know, the paint is dry enough. So I'm going to temporarily install this because this cable, it's about 5 feet long, and we only need about half that. So once this is in place, we'll figure out exactly where we need to cut the cable to make it fit. As far as the routing goes of the cable, I think we have two options on this engine. One of them's right here. There is a bracket that'll hold the outer sleeve. It'll clamp down, and then the cable itself actually attaches right in there. So that's what I've used on other go-karts. But this bracket, I think, might have an option right there as well. Although that is a different style clamp. I'm not sure if it's compatible with this cable. Anyway, before we connect the cable, I actually have to get the airbox off because the throttle lever, it's kind of binding up. It's like rubbing on the bottom of the airbox. So we need to get the airbox off and figure out how to fix that. Yeah, actually, I thought this was rubbing on the bottom of the airbox, but I don't think that's the case because it's binding kind of even without the airbox. So I think we just need to loosen this nut a little bit, and that should free this up. Fixed. Yeah, so one option is to run it like that, and when you step on the pedal, you know, that will actuate this. And the other option is just coming at it the other way. So we actually have to hang the cable slightly over the back, and then it would route actually like that. So either option I think would work. You know, I kind of like this clamp better. Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot more forgiving on the cable. So I'm going to cut it, I think, assuming that I'm going to use this. You know, worst case, you know, I think it would actually be shorter going this way, but I can see already too, this could potentially interfere. So yeah, let's keep it like that. So we should cut this cable right about there. And once we do that, it's actually going to fray because this is a braided cable. So what I'm going to do is use this right here. This is just an eyelet for an electrical connection. But if we cut off the eye, we'll just be left with a barrel underneath this plastic. So we'll get the plastic off, just keep the piece we need. We'll crimp the barrel on there so that we don't fray this wire. All right, let's give this a try. We'll turn the ignition switch on. And I also added a tachometer. I want to keep an eye on what the top speed is. You know, I set this initially based on the amount of travel we set earlier, you know, at around 3,700 RPM. And then I actually backed off the high speed screw about a half a turn. So this should be what's limiting our top speed. So I want to make sure we're around 36, maybe 3,700 at most. Anyway, we'll get it started. Obviously, we'll test the pedal, make sure it works. And I want to try to find the source of that noise. I've been looking around, just trying to find anything loose. And the biggest thing that I've found so far is this shaft right here. So I'm thinking a lot of the noise is coming from there. So I don't know if adding the wheel will help with that situation, or maybe we need to somehow snug that up. Anyway, we'll worry about that later. For now, let's just make sure the switch and the pedal work. All right, I think that was a pretty good test. The pedal works fine. We were maxing out at about 3,500 RPM, so I think that's a good place to start. We can always tweak that later as needed. You know, the switch also works fine, and the rattle, definitely coming from the cart. You know, I think the majority of it is actually coming from this piece of sheet metal right here. It's actually not welded to this tube, and I'm thinking it's just vibrating against the tube, and that's most likely where all the noise is coming from. So yeah, if I had known that before I painted it, I would have welded that up, and I still might, you know, but we haven't even taken this for a ride yet, so I think I'm gonna come back to that later. For now, let's finish this up. We'll get the seat on, we'll get the wheel on, we'll get the chain on, and take it for a ride. Yeah, I was really worried about that seat cover. This came from BMIKarts. They didn't list it as being compatible with this go-kart, but as you can see, it is a perfect fit. Anyway, as far as the wheel goes, it's, well, not in great shape. All the plastic is kind of broken away, and there's a bunch of rust. You know, although technically it would still work, I was able to locate a replacement from Amazon. You know, it was dirt cheap. I want to say like $15 or $20, and it has the correct bolt pattern. So we will bolt that on, and then I think we can put the chain on. think this is going to be the biggest challenge. Thankfully, the cover is pretty flexible, so we have a chance. All right, well, the goal this year was to get an ATV because my kids are kind of outgrowing go-karts, but you're still going to fit for a couple more years. So this is the Maiden Voyage. Take it easy. If something goes wrong, turn the switch off. So actually turn it on, and we'll get you going. It's good. He's testing the brakes because we got a hill. So this is just a test run. We're actually going to get the Dingo out of storage later and have a little fun with some vintage karts. Goes pretty fast. All right, tests went pretty well. Everything worked, no malfunctions, no issues to report, other than it's bumpy. And yeah, that's kind of the nature of the beast. This kart has absolutely nothing for suspension. So, I'm going to let a little bit of air out of the tires. That should help a bit. I'm also going to get the dingo out from its winter slumber, and we'll race some vintage karts for a bit. So I just checked the pressure on the wheels, and the back ones were actually close to 20 psi. Those came inflated from GoPowerSports, so they're now down to 5. In the front, I put 14 in, and they're also down by 5. So, yeah, any improvement?
Significantly.
Really? That's good news, because this is not going to get suspension. So, yeah, I guess lesson is, if you don't have suspension, let as much air out as you feel comfortable. The front have tubes, so you can let quite a bit out without a problem. The back, though, they are tubeless, so you have to have at least enough pressure to keep them on the rim. Anyway, this technically is a 2-seater, so we're gonna attempt it. So why don't you try to squeeze in the little space that's left. It's a little tight. Take it easy. We don't need to lose anybody out the side, okay? Okay. Is the switch on? Yeah. All right, here we go. We're good. Huh. Looks a little fast. And that's not even 3,600 RPM. I think your sister wants to drive.
Okay. Should I stay in with her?
Yeah, so you can take control if things go wrong.
Which one's the gas? Are you sure?
No.
So how was it?
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
All right, you ready?
Yeah.
I think it's time for Dad to try this out. Hopefully I fit. It's a tight fit, but I do fit. I slid off the seat. Bit of a death wobble. Well, guys, that's pretty much a wrap. You know, this go-kart was given to me for free, condition unknown, and it's usually the free stuff that ends up being the most amount of work, and this one, for sure, was no exception. You know, I went into it hoping to save the original 5-horse engine and keep this as original as possible, like I did to the Dingo, and as we quickly discovered, that engine was done. And actually a lot of things on it were done as well. So we ended up doing a major project, a major overhaul to this go-kart. You know, almost everything is new. You know, of course we painted it up and made it look real nice. So, you know, I'd say this kart has never run better. You know, from the factory it had a less powerful engine and a clutch. Now we have a torque converter with a live axle. Not to mention a better engine, at least horsepower wise. So in the end, this was a lot of work. I learned a lot. And yeah, next time, I think I need to get an ATV. The kids are kind of outgrowing this stuff. In fact, if you look at my son's helmet, you can see all the red paint marks from him hitting the rollover cage. So the paint, although it's dry, it's not fully cured, and it is chipping off with impacts from the helmet. So might have to give this a few more days to dry, but you know, for the most part, this thing is done. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.